At the turn of 20th century, the nation of Europe has been largely at peace with one another for nearly 30 years. This was no accident. Effort to put an end to war and achieve permanent peace has been gaining momentum in Europe since the middle of 19th century. By 1900s, hundreds of peace organizations were active. In addition, peace congresses convened regularly between 1843 and 1907. Some Europeans believed that progress has been made, war a thing of the past. Yet a little more than a decade, a massive war had engulfed the Europe and spread across the globe. On the surface, Europe seemed to be peaceful, but underneath this calm surface, tensions were building, both between and within nations. Several gradual developments would ultimately help propel the continent into war. Rise of nationalism. On such developments was the growth of nationalism, or a sense of devotion into one's national group. The first important example of nationalism appeared in the American and French revolutions. The idea soon spread throughout both Latin America and Europe. During the 1800s, nationalism was among the forces that unified the separate states of Germany and Italy, transforming them into cohesive nations with a clear national identity. In some other European powers, however, nationalism was a dividing force rather than a unifying one. The Ottoman Empire had once controlled most of the land on eastern and southern shores of the Mediterranean, as well as the Balkan Peninsula, a region in southeast of Europe. By the beginning of 20th century, some of the many ethnic groups within the empire had formed nationalist movement, as Serbs, Albanians, Bulgarians, Romanians, and other ethnic groups all sought independence. Other powers in the region hoped to seize them, thus increasing their territory. Eventually, Serbia, Albania, Bulgaria, Greece, Macedonia, Montenegro, and Romania emerged as independent states. Other Ottoman territories in Europe were annexed by Russia and Austria-Hungary. Economic rivalry. Europe's great powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, and France, were also rivals in other areas. This increasing rivalry stemmed from several sources. One source was industrialization. Germany and Great Britain led Europe in industrial growth, which gave them economic power, especially compared to less industrialized nations. This caused increased competition for materials and markets. The other nations of Europe struggled to build their own industrial bases in order to catch up economically with Germany and Great Britain. Political rivalry. Another source was political rivalry and territorial disputes. France, for example, had never gotten over the loss of Alsace-Lorraine to Germany in the France-Prussian War. Austria-Hungary and Russia both tried to dominate the Balkans as the Ottoman Empire crumbled. Imperialism and nationalism. Another force that helped set the stage for war in Europe was imperialism. The nations of Europe compete fiercely for colonies in Africa and Asia. The quest for colonies sometimes pushed European nations to the brink of war. As European countries continued to compete for overseas empire, their rivalry and mistrust of one another deepened. Yet another troubling development throughout the early years of the 20th century was the rise of a dangerous European arms race. The nations of Europe believed that to be truly great, they'd need to have a powerful military. By 1914, all the great powers except Britain had a large standing armies. In addition, military experts stressed the importance of being able to quickly mobilize or organize the troops in case of a war. Generals in each country developed highly detailed plans for such a mobilization. The policy of glorifying military power and keeping an army prepared for war was known as militarism. Having a large and strong standing army made citizens feel patriotic. However, it also frightened some people. As early as 1895, Frederick Passy, a prominent peace activist, expressed the concern that a minor accident could ignite a devastating war throughout Europe. Tangled alliances. Growing rivalries and mutual mistrust had led to the creation of several military alliances among the great powers as early as 1870s. This alliance system has been designed to keep peace in Europe, but it would instead help push the continent into war. Between 1864 and 1871, Prussia's blood and iron chancellor WW1 Bismarck freely used war to unify Germany. After 1871, however, Bismarck declared Germany to be a satisfied power. He then turned these energies to maintaining peace in Europe. Bismarck saw France as the greatest threat to the peace. He believed that France still wanted a revenge for its defeat in France-Prussian War. Bismarck's first goal, therefore, was to isolate France as long as it is without allies. Bismarck stressed France poses no dangers to us. In 1879, Bismarck found dual alliances between Germany and Austria-Hungary. 3 years later, Italy joined the two countries, forming the Triple Alliance. In 1881, Bismarck took yet another possible ally away from France by making a treaty with Russia. Shifting alliance threatened peace in Europe. In 1890, Germany's foreign policy changed dramatically. That year, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who 2 years earlier had become the ruler of Germany, forced Bismarck to resign. A proud and stubborn man, Wilhelm II did not wish to share powers with anyone. Besides wanting to exert his own power, the new Kaiser was eager to show the world just how mighty Germany had become. The army was his great pride. I and the army were born for one another, Wilhelm declared shortly after taking power. Wilhelm led his nation treaties with Russia lapsed in 1890s. Russia responded by forming a defensive military alliance with France in 1892 and 1894. Such an alliance has been Bismarck's fear. War with either Russia or France would make Germany enemy of both. Germany would then be forced to fight the two-front war, or a war on both its eastern and western borders. Next, Wilhelm began a tremendous shipbuilding program in an effort to make Germany's navy equal to the mighty British fleet. Alarmed, Great British formed an entente or alliance with France. In 1907, Britain made another entente, this time with both France and Russia. The Triple Entente, as it was called, did not bind Britain to fight with France and Russia. However, it did almost certainly to ensure that Britain would not fight against them. By 1907, the two rival camps existed in Europe. On one side was the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary and Italy. On the other side was the Triple Entente, Great Britain, France and Russia. A dispute between two rival powers could draw all the nations of Europe into war. Crisis in the Balkans. Now here was the dispute more likely to occur than on the Balkan Peninsula. This mountainous peninsula in the southeastern corner of Europe was home to an assortment of ethnic groups, with a long history of nationalist uprising and ethnic clashes. The Balkan region was known as Powder King of Europe. Balkans, a restless region. By the early 1900s, Ottoman Empire, which included the Balkan region, was in a rapid decline, while some Balkan groups struggled to free themselves from the Ottoman Turks. Others had already succeeded in breaking away from their Turkish rule. These people had formed a new nations including Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, Romania, and Serbia. Nationalism was a powerful force in these countries, prompting them to extend their borders. Serbia, for example, had a large Slavic population. It hoped to observe all the Slavs on the Balkan Peninsula. Russia itself, a mostly Slavic nation, supported Serbian nationalism. However, Serbia's powerful northern neighbors, Austria-Hungary, opposed such an effort. Austria feared that the effort to create a Slavic state would stir rebellion among its Slavic population. In 1908, Austria annexed or took over Bosnia or Herzegovina. These were the two Balkan areas with large Slavic population. Serbian leaders who had sought to rule these provinces were outraged. In the years that followed, tensions between Serbia and Austria rose steadily. The Serbian vowed to take Bosnia and Herzegovina away from Austria. In response, Austria-Hungary vowed to crush any Serbian effort to undermine its authority in the Balkans. Into this boiling atmosphere of mutual dislike and mistrust stepped the heir of Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie. On June 28, 1914, the couple paid a state visit to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. It would be their last. The royal pair was shot at the point-blank range as they rode through the streets of Sarajevo in an open car. The killer was Gavrilo, a 19-year-old Serbian and a member of Black Hand. The Black Hand was a secret society committee to ridding Bosnia of Austrian rule. Because the assassin was a Serbian, Austria decided to use the murder as an excuse to punish Serbia. On July 23rd, Austria presented Serbia with an ultimatum containing numerous demands. Serbia knew that refusing the ultimatum would lead to war against the most powerful Austria. Therefore, Serbian leaders agreed to most of Austria's demands. They offered to have several others settled by an international conference. Austria, however, was in no mood to negotiate. The nation's leader, it seemed, had already settled on a war. On July 28, Austria rejected Serbia's offer and declared war. That same day, Russia, an ally of Serbia, with its largely Slavic population, took action. Russian leaders ordered the mobilization of troops toward Austrian border. Leaders all over Europe suddenly took notice. The fragile European stability seemed ready to collapse into armed conflict. The British Foreign Minister, the Italian government, and even Kaiser Wilhelm himself argued Austria and Russia to negotiate. But it was too late. The machinery of war had been set into motion. Europe had been plunged into war. By 1914, Europe was divided into two rival camps, the Alliance and the Triple Entente, including Great Britain, France, and Russia, the other known as Triple Alliance. including Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Austria-Hungary's declaration of war against Serbia set off a chain of reaction within the alliance system. The countries of Europe followed through on their pledges to support one another. As a result, nearly all of Europe joined what would be the largest, most destructive war the world has ever seen. And the Great War has now begun. In response to Austria's declaration of war, Russia, Serbia's ally, began moving its army toward the Russian-Austrian border, expecting Germany to join Austria. Russia also mobilized along German borders. To Germany, Russia's mobilization amounted to a declaration of war. On August 1st, the German government declared war on Russia. Russia looked to its ally France for help. Germany, however, did not even wait for France to react. 2 days after declaration of war on Russia, Germany also declared war on France. Soon afterward, Great Britain declared war on Germany. Much of Europe was now locked in battle. Nations take sides. By the mid-August 1914, battle lines were clearly drawn. On one side were Germany, Austria, and Hungary. They were known as the Central Powers because of their location in the heart of Europe. Bulgaria and Ottoman Empire would later join the Central Powers in the hope of retaining lost territories. On the other side were Great Britain, France, and Russia. Together, they were known as the Allied Power or the Allies. Japan joined the Allies within weeks. Italy joined later. Italy had been a member of Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary. However, the Italians joined the other side after accusing their former partners of unjustly starting the war. In late summer of 1914, millions of soldiers marched happily off to battle, convinced that the war would be short. Only a few people foresaw the horror ahead. One of them was British Foreign Minister Sir Edward Grey. Staring out over London at nightfall, Grey said sadly to a friend, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them light again in our lifetime." Bloody stalemate. It did not take long Sir Edward Grey's prediction to ring true. As the summer of 1914 turned to fall, the war turned into long and bloody stalemate or deadlock. Along the battlefields of France, this deadlock region in the northern France became known as the Western Front. Facing a war on two fronts, Germany had developed a battle strategy known as Chef and Frame, named after its designer, General Alfred Graf. The plan called for attacking and defeating France in the west and then rushing east to fight Russia. The Germans felt that they could carry out such plan because Russia lagged behind the rest of Europe in its railroad system, and thus would take longer to supply its front lines. Nonetheless, speed was vital to Chef and Frame. German leaders knew that they needed to win a quick victory over France. Early on, it appeared that the Germany would just do that. By early September, German forces had swept into France and reached the outskirts of Paris. A major German victory appeared just 2 days away. On September 5, however, the Allies regrouped and attacked the German northeast of the Paris, in the valley of Marne River. Every available soldier was hurled into the struggle. When reinforcements were needed, more than 600 taxicabs rushed soldiers from Paris to the front. After 4 days of fighting, the German generals gave the order to retreat. Although it was only the first major clash on the Western Front, the First Battle of Marne was perhaps the single most important event of war. The defeats of Germany left the Champagne plains in rain. A quick victory in the west no longer seemed possible. In the east, Russian forces had already invaded Germany. Germany was going to have to fight a long war on two fronts. Realizing this, the German High Command sent thousands of troops from France to aid its forces in the east. Meanwhile, the war on the Western Front settled into stalemate. On both sides of the conflict, governments called on academic and industrial scientists to further the war efforts. Even before the war began, German scientists began work on finding replacement for some key resources such as rubber for car and truck tires. Synthetic rubber now supplies most of the world's rubber needs. German chemists also developed chemical weapons such as poison gas, which military strategists hoped could help them quickly win the war. In response, scientists in France and Great Britain developed their own chemical weapons and worked on ways to protect soldiers from these weapons. Other new weapons included guns that could fire multiple rounds or that could shoot across a great distance. By 1915, the war took to the skies when fighter planes were developed. All these innovations increased the number of casualties in the front. Soon, research and field experience combined to improve care for the wounded. Injured soldiers could be given initial treatment on the field, then moved by ambulance for further treatment. Mobile X-ray units made it possible to find bullets and shrapnels in the wounds. A safe way of storing blood was developed, leading to the creation of first rudimentary blood bank. As a result, many soldiers survived. Even with the serious injury, the number of configuring head injuries led to doctors to develop reconstructive surgery techniques. There was also an increased focus on rehabilitations and new approaches to prosthetic limbs. War in the trenches. By early 1915, opposing armies on the Western Front had dug miles of parallel trenches to protect themselves from enemy fire. This set the stage for what has become known as trench warfare. In this type of warfare, soldiers fought each other from trenches, and army traded huge losses of human life for pitifully small gains in territory. Life in trenches was pure misery. The men slept in mud, washed in mud, ate mud, and dreamed mud. Wrote one soldier, the trenches swarmed with rats. Fresh food was non-existent, sleep was nearly impossible. The space between opposing trenches won the grim name No Man's Land. When officers ordered an attack, their men went over the top of their trenches into the bombed-out landscape. There, they usually met murderous rounds of machine gun fire. Staying put, however, did not ensure one's safety. Artillery fire barred dead right into the trenches. Shells, all of calibers, kept raining on our sector. Wrote one French soldier, the trenches disappeared, filled with earth. The air was unbreathable. Our blinded, wounded, crawling and shouting soldiers kept falling on top of us and died splashing with blood. It was a living hell. The Eastern Front had become a terrain of death. It stretched nearly 500 miles from the North Sea to the Swiss border. A British soldier described it in a letter. Imagine a broad belt, 10 miles or so in width, stretching from the Channel to the German frontier near Basel, which is positively littered with the bodies of men sacrificed with rude graves, in which farms, villages, cottages, and shapeless heaps of blackened masonry, in which fields, roads, and trees are pitted and torn twisted by shells and disfigured by dead horses, cattle, sheep, and goats, scattered in every attitude of repulsive distortion and dismemberment. Military strategists were at loss. New tools of war, machine guns, poison gas, armor tanks, larger artillery, had not delivered the fast-moving war they had expected. All these new technology did was to kill greater number of people more effectively. The slaughter reached a peak in 1916. In February, the Germans launched a massive attack against the French near Verdun. Each side lost more than 300,000 men. In July, the British Army tried to relieve the pressure on the French. British forces attacked the German northeast of the Verdun, in the valley of the Somme River. In the first day of battle alone, more than 20,000 British soldiers were killed. By the time the Battle of Somme ended in November, each side had suffered more than 500,000 casualties. So, what did the Waring side gain? Near Verdun, the German advance is about 4 miles. In the Somme Valley, the German gained about 5 miles. Meanwhile, the network of trenches had long-term sequences for the environment. The battle on the Eastern Front. Even as the war on the Western Front claimed thousands of lives, both sides were sending millions more men to fight on the Eastern Front. This area was a stretch of battlefield along the German and Russian borders. Here, Russians and Serbs battled German and Austro-Hungarians. The war in the East was now a more mobile war than that was in the West. Early fightings. At the beginning of the war, Russian forces had launched an attack into both Austria and Germany. At the end of August, German counterattacked near the town of Tannenberg. During the 4-day battle, the Germany crushed the invading Russian army and drove it into full retreat. More than 30,000 Russian soldiers were killed. Russia fared somewhat better against the Austrians. Russian forces defeated the Austrians twice in September, driving deep into their country. Not until December of that year did the Austrian army manage to turn the tide. Austria defeated the Russians and eventually pushed them out of Austria-Hungary. Russian struggles. By 1916, Russia's war effort was near collapse, unlike the nations of Western Europe. Russia had yet to become industrialized. As a result, the Russian was continually short of food, guns. The Frozen Front. For soldiers on the Eastern Front, the overall misery of warfare was compounded by deadly winters. Every day, hundreds froze to death. Noted one Austro-Hungarian officer during a particularly brutal spell. Russian troops suffered too, mainly due to their lack of food and clothing. "I am at my post all the time, frozen, soaked," lamented one soldier. "We walk barefoot or in rope-soled shoes. It's incredible that soldiers of Russian army are in rope-soled shoes." Munition, clothes, boots, blankets. Moreover, the Allied supply shipments to Russia were sharply limited by German controls of Baltic Sea, combined with Germany's relentless submarine campaign in the North Sea and beyond. In the south, the Ottomans still controlled the strait leading to Mediterranean to the Black Sea. The Russian army had only one asset: its numbers. Throughout the war, the Russian army suffered a staggering number of battlefield losses. Yet the army eventually rebuilt its strength from the country's enormous population. For more than 3 years, the battered Russian army managed to tie up hundreds of thousands of German troops in the east. As a result, Germany could not hurl its full fighting force at the west. Germany and her allies, however, were concerned with more than just the eastern or western front. As the war raged on, fighting spread beyond Europe to Africa, as well as to South, West and Southeast Asia. In the years after it began, a massive European conflict indeed became a global war. Military aviation. World War I introduced an airplane warfare, and by doing so, ushered in an era of tremendous progress in the field of military aviation. Although the plane itself was relatively new and untested by 1914, the warring nation quickly recognized its potential as a powerful weapon. Throughout the conflict, countries on both sides built faster and stronger aircrafts and designed them to drop bombs and shoot at one another in the sky. Between the beginning and end of the war, the total number of planes in use by major combatants soared from 850 to to nearly tens of thousands. After the war, the country continued to maintain a strong and advanced air force as they realized the supremacy of air as a key to military victory. A global conflict setting the stage. World War I was much more than a European conflict. Australia and Japan, for example, entered the war on the Allies' side, while India supplied troops to fight alongside their British rulers. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Turks and the later Bulgaria allied themselves with Germany and Central Powers. As the war promised to be grim, drawn-out affairs, all great powers looked for other allies around the globe to tip the balance. They also sought new war fronts where they might achieve victory. As the war dragged on, the main combatants looked beyond Europe for a way to end the stalemate. However, none of the alliances they formed or new battlefronts they opened did much to end the slow and grinding conflict. The Gallipoli Campaign. A promising strategy for the Allies seemed to attack a region in the Ottoman Empire known as Dardanelles. This narrow sea strait was the gateway to the Ottoman capital, Constantinople. By securing Dardanelles, the Allies believed that they could take Constantinople, defeat the Turks, and establish a supply line to Russia. The effort to take the Dardanelles Strait began in February 1915. It was known as the Gallipoli Campaign. British, Australian, New Zealand, and French troops made repeated assault on Gallipoli Peninsula on the western side of the strait. Turkish troops, some commanded by German officers, vigorously defended the region, and by May, Gallipoli had returned into another bloody stalemate. Both sides dug trenches from which they battled for the rest of the year. In December, the Allies gave up the campaign and began to evacuate. Battles in Africa and Asia. In various parts of Asia and Africa, German colonial positions come under assault. The Japanese quickly overran German outposts in China. They also captured German Pacific Islands colonies. English and French troops attacked Germany 4 African positions. They seized control of 3. Elsewhere in Asia and Africa, the British and French recruited subjects in their colonies for struggle. Fighting troops as well as laborers came from India, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, and Indochina. Many fought and died on the battlefields. Other worked to keep front lines supplied. To be sure, some colonial subjects wanted nothing to do with the European rulers' conflict. Others volunteered in the hope that the service would lead to their independence. This was the view of Indian political leader Mohandas Gandhi, who supported Indian participation in the war. If we would improve our status through the help and cooperation of British, he wrote, this was our duty to win their help by standing by them in their hour of needs. America joined the fight. In 1917, the focus of war shifted to the high seas. There, Germany intensified submarine warfare that had raged in the Atlantic Ocean since shortly after the war began. In January 1917, Germany announced that their submarine would sink without warning any ship in the waters around Britain. This policy was called unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany has tried this policy before. On May 7, 1915, a German submarine or U-boat had sunk the British passenger ship Lusitania. The attack left around 1,200 people dead, including 128 US citizens. Germany claimed that the ship had been carrying ammunition, which turned out to be true. Nevertheless, the American public was outraged. President Woodrow Wilson sent a strong protest to Germany after 2 further attacks. The Germans finally agreed to stop attacking the neutral and passenger ships. Desperate for advantage over the Allies, however, Germany returned to the unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917. They knew it might lead to a war with the United States. They gambled that their naval blockade would starve Britain into defeat before the United States could mobilize. Ignoring warning by President Wilson, German U-boats sank 3 American ships. In February 1917, another German action pushed the United States closer to the war. Officials intercepted a telegram written by Germany for Science Secretary Arthur Zimmermann, stating that Germany would help Mexico conquer and land it had lost to the United States if Mexico would ally itself with Germany. The Zimmermann note simply proved to be the last straw. A large part of American population already favored the Allies. In particular, America felt a bond with England. The two nations shared common ancestry and language, as well as democratic institutions and legal systems. More important, American economic ties with the Allies were far stronger than those of the Central Powers. On April 1917, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war so that the United States could enter World War I. This excerpt from his speech gives some of his reasons. The world must be made safe for democracy. Its peace must be planted upon the tested foundation of political liberty. We have no selfish end to serve. We desire no conquest, no dominion. We seek no indemnity for ourselves, no material compensation for the sacrifice we shall freely make. We are but one of the champions of the right of mankind. We shall be satisfied with those rights have been made as secure as the faith in the freedom of nations can make them. Days later, the United States entered the war on the side of the Allies. War affected the home front. By the time the United States joined the Allies, the war had been raging for nearly 3 years. In those 3 years, Europe had lost more men in the battle than all of the wars of the previous 3 centuries. The war had claimed the lives of millions and had changed countless lives forever. The Great War, as the conflict came to be known, affected everyone. It touched not only soldiers in the trenches, but civilians as well. Government waged total war. World War I soon became a total war. This meant that countries devoted all their resources to the war effort. In Britain, Germany, Austria, Russia and France, the entire force of government was dedicated to winning the conflict. In each country, the wartime government took control of the economy. Government told factories what to produce and how much. Numerous facilities were converted to munition factories. Nearly every able-bodied civilian was put to work. Unemployment in many European countries all but disappeared. So many goods were in short supply, the government turned to rationing. Under this system, people could buy only small amount of those items that were also needed for the war effort. Eventually, rationing covered a wide range of goods from butter to shoe leather. Government also suppressed anti-war activity, sometimes forcibly. In addition, they censored news about the war. Many leaders feared that the honest reporting of war could turn people against it. Government also used propaganda, one-sided information designed to persuade to keep up morale and efforts for the war. Women's role in the war. Total war meant that government turned to help from women as never before. Thousands of women replaced men in factories, offices, and shops. Women built tanks and munitions, plowed fields, paved streets, and ran hospitals. They also kept troops supplied with food, clothing, and weapons. Although most women left the workforce when the war ended, they changed many people's views of what women were capable of doing. Women also saw horrors of war firsthand, working on or near the front lines as nurses, Here, American nurse Shirley Millard described her experience with a soldier who lost his eyes and feet. He moaned through the bondage that his head was splitting with pain. I gave him morphine, suddenly aware of the fact that he had wounds. He asked, "What's the matter with my legs?" Reaching down to feel his legs before I could stop him, he uttered a heartbreaking scream. I held his hand firmly until the drug I had given him took effect. The Allies finally won the war. With the United States finally in the war, it seemed that the balance was about to tip in Allies' favor. Before that happens, however, events in Russia gave Germany a victory to Western Front, a new hope for winning the conflict. The influenza pandemic. In the spring of 1918, a powerful new enemy emerged, threatening nations on each side of World War I. This enemy was a deadly strain of influenza, Spanish flu as it was popularly known, hit England and India in May. By the fall, it had spread throughout Europe, Russia, Asia, and to the United States. Influenza pandemic killed soldier and civilian alike. In India, at least 12 million people died of influenza. In Berlin, on a single day in October, 1,500 people died. In the end, this global pandemic was more destructive than the war itself, killing 20 million people worldwide. Russia withdraws from the war. In March 1917, civil unrest in Russia, due to in large part to war-related shortages of food and fuel, forced Caesar Nicholas to step down. In his place, a provisional government was established. The new government pledged to continue fighting the war. However, by 1917, nearly 5.5 Russian soldiers had been wounded, killed, or taken prisoners. As a result, the war-weary Russian army refused to fight any longer. 8 months after the new government took over, a revolution took in Russia. In November 1917, communist leader Vladimir Lenin seized power. Lenin insisted on ending this country's involvement in the war. One of his first acts was to offer Germany a truce. In March 1918, Germany and Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which ended the war between them. The collapse of Central Powers. Russia's withdrawal from the war at last allowed Germany to send nearly all its forces to the Western Front. In March 1918, Germany mounted one final massive attack on the Allies in France. As in the opening weeks of the war, the German forces crushed everything in their path. By late May 1918, the German had achieved the Marine River. Paris was less than 40 miles away. Victory seemed within reach. By this time, however, German military has been weakened. The effort to reach men has been exhausted men and supplies alike. Sensing this weakness, the Allies, with the aid of nearly 140,000 fresh US troops, launched a counterattack. In 1918, the Allies and the Germans clashed at the Second Battle of Marne. Leading the Allied attack were some 350 tanks that rumbled slowly forward, smashing throughout the German lines. With the arrival of 2 million from American troops, the Allied forces began to advance steadily toward Germany. Soon, the Central Power began to crumble. First, the Bulgarian and then the Ottoman Turks surrendered. In the October Revolution swept through Austria-Hungary. In Germany, soldiers mutinied and the public turned into Kaiser. On November 9, 1918, Kaiser William II stepped down. Germany declared itself a republic. A representative of the new German government met with French commander Marshal Foch in a railway car near Paris. The two signed an armistice or an agreement to stop fighting on November. The legacy of the war. World War I was in many ways a new kind of war. It involved the use of new technologies. It ushered in the notion of war on a grand and global scale. It also left behind a landscape of death and destruction. such as was never seen before. Both sides in World War I paid a tremendous price in terms of human life. About 8.5 million soldiers died as a result of the war. Another 21 million were wounded. In addition, the war led to the death of countless civilians by the way of starvation, siege and slaughter. Taken together, these figures spelled tragedy. Entire generations of Europe were wiped out. The war also had a devastating economic impact on Europe. The Great Conflict drained the treasuries of European countries. One account put the total cost of war at $338 billion, a staggering amount for that time. The war also destroyed acres of farmland as well as homes, villages and towns. The enormous suffering that resulted from the Great War left a deep mark on Western society as well. A sense of disillusionment settled toward survivors. The insecurity and despair that many people experienced are reflected in the art and literature of time. Another significant legacy of the war lay in its peace agreement. The treaties to end the World War I were forged after great debate and compromise. And while they sought to bring a new sense of security and peace to the world, they prompted mainly anger and resentment. The flawed peace. World War I was over. The killing has stopped. The terms of peace, however, still had to be worked out. On January 18, 1919, a conference to establish those terms began at the Paris of Versailles. Without Paris attending the talk, known as the Paris Peace Conference, were delegates representing 32 countries. For 1 year, this conference would be the scene of vigorous, often bitter debate. The Allied powers struggled to solve their conflicting aims in various peace treaties. The Allies meet in debate. Although the conference included representatives from many countries, the major decisions were hammered out by a group known as the Big Four. Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Georges of France, Levet Floyd George of Great Britain, Vittorio Orlando of Italy. Russia, in the grip of civil war, was not represented. Neither were Germany and its allies. Wilson's plan for peace. In January 1918, while the war was still raging, President Wilson had drawn up a series of peace proposals known as the 14 Points. They outlined a plan for achieving a just and lasting peace. The first 4 points included an end to secret treaties, freedom of seas, free trade, reduced national enemies, and navies. The fifth goal was the adjustment of colonial claims with fairness toward colonial people. The 6th through 13th point were specific suggestions for changing borders and creating new nations. The guiding idea behind these points were left self-determination. This means allowing people to decide for themselves under what government they wish to live. Finally, the 14th point proposed a general association of nations that would protect great and small states alike. This reflected Wilson's hope for an organization that could peacefully negotiate solutions to world conflicts. Treaty of Versailles. As the Paris Peace Conference opened, Britain and France showed little sign of agreeing to Wilson's vision of peace. Both nations were concerned with national security. They also wanted to strip Germany of its war-making power. The difference in French and British US claim have led to heated argument among the nation leaders. Finally, a compromise was reached, the Treaty of Versailles, between Germany and Allied powers was signed on June 28, 1919. 5 years to the day after Franz Ferdinand's assassination in Sarajevo, adopting Wilson's 14-point, the treaty created a League of Nations. The League was to be an international association whose goal would be to keep peace among nations. The treaty also punished Germany. The defeated nation lost substantial territory and had several restrictions placed on military operations. As tough as these provisions were, the harshest was Article 231. It was also known as the War Geld Plus. It placed sole responsibility for the war on Germany's shoulders. As a result, Germany has to pay repatriation to allies. All of the German territories in Africa and Pacific were declared mandates or territories to be administered by League of Nations. Under the peace agreement, the Allied would govern the mandates until they were judged ready for independence. A troubled treaty. The Versailles Treaty was just one of the 5 treaties negotiated by allies. In the end, these agreements created feelings of bitterness and betrayal among both the victors and the defeated. New nations and mandates. The Western powers signed separate peace treaties in 1919 and 1920 with each other defeated nations, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire. These treaties too led to huge land losses for Central Powers. Several new countries were created out of Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia were also recognized and independent nations. The Ottoman Turks were forced to give up almost all of their former empire. They returned only the territory that is today the country of Turkey. The Allies carved up the land the Ottoman Empire lost in Southwest Asia into mandates rather than independent nations. Britain received the mandates for Palestine, including Jordans and Iraq. France was assigned the mandates for Syria and Lebanon. Russia, which had left the war early, suffered land losses as well. Romania and Poland both gained Russian territories. Finland, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, formerly part of Russia, became independent nations. Initial successes of peace agreement. The League of Nations held its first meeting in January 1920. Some agencies under the League's supervision were able to successfully introduce important changes. For example, the International Labour Organization introduced restrictions on meat and paint and convinced several nations to adopt standard work days and weeks. The League made progress in ending legal slavery around the world and set up a commission for refugees to help some of the millions displaced by the war. A peace built on quicksand. In the end, the Treaty of Versailles did little to build a lasting peace. For one thing, the United States, considered after the war to be the dominant nation in the world, ultimately rejected the treaty. Many Americans objected to the settlement, and especially President Wilson's League of Nations. Americans believed that the United States' best hope for peace was to stay out of European affairs. The United States worked out as a separate treaty with Germany and its allies several years later. In addition, the treaty with Germany, in particular the War Geld Clause, left a legacy of bitterness and hatred in the heart of German people. Other countries also felt cheated and betrayed by the peace settlements. Throughout Africa and Asia, people in the mandated territories were angry at the way the Allies disregarded their desire for independence. The European powers, it seemed to them, merely talk about the principles of national self-determination. European colonialism, disguised as the mandate system, continued in Asia and Africa. Some allied powers too were embittered by the outcome. Both Japan and Italy, which had entered the war to gain territory, had gained less than they wanted. Lacking the support of United States and later other world powers, the League of Nations was in no position to take action on these other complaints. The settlement at Versailles represented, as one observer noted, a peace built on quicksand. Indeed, that quicksand eventually would give way. In a little more than 2 decades, the treaty's legacy of bitterness would help plunge war into another catastrophic war.